At first, it sounds like a straightforward story. A country passes a new law, launches a crackdown, and starts shutting down scam operations. Arrests are made, compounds are raided, and people involved in fraud are taken into custody. On the surface, it looks like a clean narrative of enforcement finally catching up to with wrongdoing. But the moment you start looking deeper, this story becomes much less simple. Because what is being exposed here is not just a group of scammers. It is an entire underground system that has been operating at a scale most people never fully realized. For years, online scams have been treated like isolated incidents. A fake investment scheme here, a romance scam there, maybe a phishing message that slips through. Each one feels like a small, disconnected event, something unfortunate but limited. But what this crackdown is revealing is that these scams are not random. They are organized, structured, and in many cases industrialized. Entire operations are built around them, with recruitment pipelines, training systems, financial networks, and even management structures. The idea of a scam center sounds almost unreal at first, but that is exactly what has been uncovered. Large compounds where individuals are brought in, sometimes under false promises, and then forced or pressured into carrying out scams at scale. These are not lone actors sitting behind a laptop. These are coordinated environments where scripts are followed, targets are assigned, and performance is measured. The operation starts to look less like crime in the traditional sense and more like a business model, just one built on deception. What makes this even more disturbing is how people end up inside these systems. In many cases, recruitment does not begin with crime. It begins with opportunity. Job offers, travel promises, better pay, a chance to work abroad. For some, it feels like a way out of difficult circumstances. But once they arrive, the situation changes. Movement becomes restricted, communication is controlled, and the job they thought they accepted turns into something very different. Instead of legitimate work, they are pushed into scamming strangers online. This creates a layered reality where victims exist on both sides of the transaction. The person being scammed loses money, sometimes life savings, but the person running the scam may also be operating under pressure, coercion, or lack of alternatives. It blurs the lines between perpetrator and victim in a way that makes the entire system harder to understand and harder to dismantle. The financial side of this system is equally complex. Money doesn't simply move from victim to scammer in a straight line. It passes through multiple layers. Digital wallets, shell accounts, intermediaries, and laundering networks are used to obscure the path. By the time funds are moved, split, and transferred again, tracing the original source becomes extremely difficult. This is what allows the system to scale. It is not just about tricking individuals, it's about building a structure that can absorb and hide large volumes of money. The recent crackdown brings all of this into focus. New laws, coordinated enforcement, and international pressure are starting to push against these networks. Raids on compounds, arrests of organizers, and efforts to repatriate individuals who were trapped inside these operations are now part of the picture. But what makes this moment important is not just the actions being taken. It's what those actions are revealing about how deep and widespread the system actually is. Because once you start looking at it as a system, the question changes. It is no longer just, how do you stop a scam? It becomes, how do you disrupt an entire ecosystem? And that is a much harder problem. You aren't dealing with a single group or a single tactic. You are dealing with a network that adapts, shifts locations, changes methods, and evolves with technology. There's also an economic layer to this story that is often overlooked. These operations exist because they generate significant revenue. If they didn't work, they wouldn't scale. That means there is a constant flow of money supporting them, which in turn funds expansion, recruitment, and more sophisticated methods. In some areas, this activity becomes embedded in the local economy, making it even harder to remove without broader disruption.
Technology plays a major role as well. The same tools that make global communication easier also make these operations more effective. Messaging apps, social platforms, and digital payment systems allow scammers to reach targets across borders with very little friction. At the same time, they make it harder for enforcement agencies to keep up, especially when operations are spread across multiple jurisdictions. The human element, however, is what makes this story particularly complex. On one side, there are individuals who have lost money, trust, and in some cases, their financial stability. On the other side, there are individuals who may be participating in these scams under conditions they did not fully choose. And in the middle, there are organizers who build and maintain the system, profiting from both sides of the equation. This is why the crackdown matters. Not because it solves the problem overnight, but because it changes the visibility of the problem. It takes something that was often seen as scattered and brings it into a clearer, more structured view. It shows that these are not isolated incidents. They are connected parts of a larger system that has been allowed to grow in the background. At the same time, it raises new questions. If one location becomes harder to operate in, where do these networks go next? If one method becomes less effective, what replaces it? Systems like this rarely disappear. They adapt, they shift, they look for new gaps to exploit. That means enforcement is not a one-time solution. It becomes an ongoing process of pressure and response. There is also the challenge of coordination. Because these networks operate across borders, addressing them requires cooperation between multiple countries, agencies, and systems. Laws in one place may not apply in another. Enforcement capabilities vary, and the speed at which these networks can move often exceeds the speed at which policies can respond. What this crackdown ultimately explains is not just the existence of scam centers, but the scale of the environment they are part of. It reveals that the modern scam economy is not just about deception. It is about structure, incentives, and systems that allow that deception to operate efficiently. And that changes how you think about the problem. It is no longer just about being careful online or avoiding suspicious messages. Those are important, but they are only one layer. The deeper issue is that there are organized systems designed to exploit attention, trust, and human behavior at scale. In the end, the story is not simply about enforcement catching up. It is about visibility catching up. For a long time, this system operated in the background, partially seen but not fully understood. Now, with more attention, more action, and more information coming to light, it is becoming harder to ignore how large and complex it really is. And once you see it that way, the question shifts again. It is no longer just about whether these operations can be shut down in one place. It becomes about whether the broader system that allows them to exist can actually be reduced, or whether it will continue to evolve, just out of sight, in a slightly different form.